Ted Lasso Season 3, Episode 10. My god, what an episode. For me, this is the best episode of the season, and I think I've got a really good point to make about it, I hope. There are some criticisms to be made, yes. Abruptly having the legendary Jeff Stelling tell us that Nate left his job. I said last episode that something needed to go wrong for Nate, and with 3 episodes left, it needed to happen soon, but I did not expect it to be quite so sudden as that. I think there's decent rationale for delivering the news this way. It creates an air of mystery for the episode. Why did he leave? While there's rumours of misconduct, and Rupert seems to suddenly have a new assistant, so we can sort of piece things together, and in a way I quite like leaving it as this half-known plot point to hang in the air, but it is still abrupt, and combined with the abruptness of the board pulling their funding on Keeley's PR firm, that's 2 quite abrupt plot points just told to us at the start of this episode. And then also Keeley and Roy abruptly getting back together, actually. Many more, and we could argue the theme of this episode is abruptness. No, right. In spite of that, I found this episode to be a brilliant one, with one clear point I really want to make, but before then, there's some stuff we need to discuss along the way. One of which is this general theme here of people returning to their roots in order to grow, so let's get going. The international break, with players going back to their home countries, is a good motif for all of this stuff about returning to roots. None more important, obviously, than the clear arc for the character Coach Beard revealing where he's from.
I'm from Peoria.
No, right, none more important than Nathan. A man who has built himself high on his managerial successes with West Ham. He was proving himself, he was succeeding in all the ways he hoped would make his dad proud, would honour the belief Rupert showed in him, and then suddenly that's gone. He is no longer Mr. Big Shot Manager, so who is he then? You know, we are all far more as people than just our successes and failures, but when you see your successes come crashing down in such a dramatic way, I think it's natural you would question that a little. Exactly the same as Keeley, both of them crash, with Keeley hiding away in a pub and Nate locked away in his room with this very prison cell montage. I liked that. Not to say this is a moment of failure, by the way, but it feels like a crash on some level, and it leaves them with self-doubt and the question of where to go now. With Jade also going back to her roots for a trip to Poland, Nathan decides to stay back with his family for a couple of days. He finds himself looking through old photo albums, pictures of him as a child, which is such a simple thing to do, but at a time where he feels like he's lacking an anchor, it's surprising the kind of effects this can have, and even better, it reminds him of something he loves. Playing the violin. I think there are many children out there who lost complete touch with the love and creativity of music due to the pressures put upon them to practice and perform well. In many ways, that's what makes the violin such a good metaphor here, because the success shouldn't be the priority.
Who said I wouldn't practice enough? I was squandering my potential and wasting my privilege.
This was a scene where I was both celebrating at the TV and I also got slightly teary. Finally Nathan is saying this to the person he needs to express it to. Not to Ted this time, but his dad. And for a split second it seems like it's going to derail into an argument, his father defending his parenting.
You were given opportunities I never had.
You can see how difficult this conversation is for him, and yeah, it would be. Nobody wants to feel like a bad parent, like they failed their son, which I wouldn't be surprised if that's how some of this feels to the dad on some level. Many family arguments come out of one side blaming the other and that side getting defensive, but really, at the heart of it, none of this is about blame. Deep down, that is not what Nathan is looking to do at all. He just wants to express his pain and for his dad to acknowledge it. To say, regardless of what his dad meant to do or the rights and wrongs of it, that this is how it felt for me personally. And it's when a parent can really take that fact in that both sides can start to move beyond it, which happens actually quite easily here. I get the sense his dad has already been reflecting a lot on their past. Perhaps seeing Nate's resignation brought it up even more, and he's able, difficult as it is, to admit,
I know that now, and I'm sorry. I didn't know how to parent a genius. You're brilliant, son. I pushed you to be the best at everything, even the violin. but I thought that's what I had to do.
It's a beautiful moment. The relief Nate must feel. The effect his father seems to have had on Nathan was not okay, and Nathan absolutely needed to express some of his anger and pain, and he deserved for it to be genuinely properly heard. But this is not about blaming our parents. Blame itself isn't what helps. Ideally, we can understand them without it having to feel like our own feelings are dismissed or somehow no longer valid. Here was a man who probably felt terrified about how brilliant his son was and lost himself in the pressure of trying to do the best for him. Nate never wanted to play the violin to succeed at it. He wanted to play because he just liked playing. That's the experience to reconnect to, unshackled as much as possible from this pressure he internalised. I'm willing to bet he went for his original job as kit man because he loved football and loved the club, and I think we can all imagine where this is going to lead him next episode or two. But I've said enough about this now, there's other points to move on to.
But first, there is one thing to take care of.
What is up with Rupert's eyes here? He looks a bit possessed. Yes, World Anvil are still sponsoring me. This is a company I genuinely love. I'm going to keep promoting and supporting them as long as I physically can. And all of you are going to listen intently. World Anvil is an online tool for world building, character creation, story planning and writing, campaign building and playing lots of different games. A load of useful stuff. I use it for my novel with the sprawling mess all of my world building turned into, and even just like, I was keen on my fictional town having a strong sense of community, so there was pages after page of who lives where, what do they think of their neighbours, where do they work, what are their opinions on local gossip. I don't know, a very big, sprawling mess that World Anvil can really help to organise with hyperlinks, different categories, timelines. You can even completely build out of your own designed calendars. Again, with hyperlinks attached to other articles, and a map to link the different timeline events too, if you fancy that. When there is so much detail, it is hard to remember it all, and having something like this to just quickly glance at and see what happens where and when becomes so damn handy. And there are other tools as well. I've not used all of them yet myself, but all the ones I have used are pretty straightforward. They do have lots of tutorials for how to use everything, but I've never needed to watch them. I've just figured it out myself pretty easily. There is a link in the description, and as a pinned comment there is the code TREE, which entitles you to 40% off any of their yearly subscriptions. And if you want to try it out first, they have a free version. Test that out for as long as you like first. Get familiar with World Anvil. You know, if you're interested, click the link. World Anvil. I should have said, by the way, in case you happen to hear weird noises in the background, the rabbits are here again. Lennon's currently eating hay, Fred is attacking a box. You might hear that, I don't know. But yeah, as Nathan looks through childhood photos of himself, Rebecca sees her child self in the mirror. A moment that, even regardless of her tiger pose technique, feels empowering. And then she walks into a stuffy room of stuffy business elites, remembers that they were once little boys, and tells them off like a snappy mother.
What do you think you're doing? Just stop it!
She tells the story of a very young Rupert Mannion sneaking in to watch Richmond games when he couldn't afford a ticket. In many ways, that's the persuasive point in her arguments. This is all about going back to our roots. In order to, in a way similar to Nate, remember what truly matters. Not the wealth, not the success. These are men with more than enough of it. This here should all be about passion and love and happiness. Should be. Edwin Akufo is proposing a Super League where all the best teams all across the world would break away from the English Premier League or the Spanish La Liga or whatever in order to form their own independent league. If you're not familiar with football, this is something a group of club owners genuinely attempted to do a couple of years back, some of which are still to this day attempting to do, and it is still a massive threat. And their motivation primarily is to bring in more money. I'm going to explain it briefly and very simply because I think it is important. It would bring in more money because it's their own league with their own broadcasting company that can charge what they like for people to watch it and can appeal all over the world much more easily than the individual national leagues can. And secondly, there's no financial risk, because in the Premier League, if the best team doesn't perform well one year, for example Chelsea, who are currently 11th in the table at time of recording, that means they're going to finish outside the top 4, which means they won't qualify for the European Champions League competition, which then means they're going to lose out on all of the income they might earn from taking part in that competition and all the attraction to potential players they might want to sign, you know, players who who would like to play in that competition. Or you can look at Southampton, who are 20th in the Premier League, meaning they will be relegated like Richmond were at the end of Season 1, which will mean they'll earn a hell of a lot less income due to the lower league having less television rights and attracting less sponsorship opportunities. And so if they form a Super League of their own where no one is ever relegated, no one loses out on those kind of benefits, it's just a fixed group of teams that never change no matter how bad they might do, then they won't have those financial risks. But it would be horrible because it means other teams, no matter how well they might perform, no matter if they're better than any of the ones in the Super League, they won't get to be part of that unless they were rich enough to have bought into it in the first place. It all then becomes a bit meaningless and incredibly corporate when, at its core, that's not what football is meant to be. It's already become far too corporate as it is. Football was always originally called the people's game. These teams were never originally brands or products for making money, they were communities. They were ordinary people coming together to create a club that is intrinsically tied to their identity and history and culture and means far more than just a product to consume. It's exactly as Rebecca says.
Football isn't just a game. Just because we own these teams doesn't mean they belong to us.
I wrote a long, probably slightly pretentious and indulgent article on my Patreon page not long ago called Why Sport Matters. And one of the points I made was kind of that sport matters because it is passion. Like few others, it's that eclectic mix of all the good and bad feelings that passion draws up. In a world where it is so easy to become apathetic, football and passion is the total opposite to that. To allow yourself to become enraptured in something so absurd is, in many ways, the true beauty of humanity. And football can feel like a religion to some people, as ridiculous as that probably sounds on face value, but you know, anything that threatens the soul of football is a nightmare in my books. Yes, that's probably being a bit dramatic, but the show goes in with violin music, so why shouldn't I be dramatic? Rebecca reminds these elites that they were once children, who once loved this game more than anything. I love this show for not shying away from at least exploring the controversies of the Super League. An owner of a football club would have to take a position on this kind of idea. You can argue the show is getting a little too political and preachy here, and I think that would be a fair argument, but I also think it'd be a hell of a lot worse to just skirt around this. You might as well make a point that is also a celebration of why football is important and 100% matches with what Rebecca would feel as a character. It should be about passion and the fans. I don't think this conversation would go as well for Rebecca in reality, and I also don't know why a club as small as Richmond are involved in Super League conversations at all, but you know, let's get to the big point now, shall we? The thing I'm hoping is going to tie this all together. Let's see. I like how Rebecca this episode doesn't so much have a big triumphant moment of overcoming Rupert. Instead, she has a moment of realising that overcoming is something she has already done, if that makes sense. I don't think overcoming is the right word, but she realises she doesn't need to beat Rupert anymore, and you can feel that change from the off here before she even notices it. She's joking with him, and there isn't quite the same edge to it, the eagerness to beat him via dialogue, or him to do the same to beat her via dialogue, you know, the same need for her to be guarded, which I think was needed before. It's not to say she shouldn't have felt that.
How could I resist the chance of having a bunch of old men speak directly to my chest?
Part of it is Rupert, of course, now playing the charm role again, laughing over the top. I think Rebecca picks up on this. Clearly he wants Rebecca back in some sort of form, and we could try picking apart his motivations, but ultimately Rebecca is able to joke a little with him, or talk warmly about his childhood, or both laugh at the food thrown over them. And I absolutely love it, even though it could be kind of uncomfortable. Why? Well, precisely because she can do all of that and still have a very, very firm boundary with Rupert.
Rupert?
A boundary that she can trust herself to hold now. That's not an easy thing to do. You know, I said this wasn't about blame, didn't I? This is the big point, similar to what happens with Nathan and his dad. For Rupert to not be this Emperor Palpatine villain anymore, someone that makes you feel incredibly guarded and afraid. Instead, he is just a man again. One you do have some warm memories with, yeah. A lot of them will be horrible memories, you don't want to lose focus on that, those experiences matter, but all the same, good good and bad, she is able to reflect on them and laugh about them, but also no way in hell is she ever going to fall back into his arms. She knows that's not going to happen now. She feels that from within. Rupert is no longer a threat to her because she has truly moved on. Rupert no longer needs to be seen as a monster. And I think this is what moving on can tend to mean. It's not suddenly all the pain ever is completely gone. You know, Rebecca still went through what she went through, but she's no longer trapped by it internally, if that makes sense. And whilst I questioned last week how very quickly Nate had managed to grow in his journey, I think he's reaching a similar point to Rebecca. This is an episode of the villains not becoming good, no, but being recognised as human again. Is that some preaching message about forgiveness? No. Nate and Rebecca both had to be angry long before they've been truly ready to move on, or truly ready to see these people for who they are. It has been a journey, but I think they're here now. And that kind of message is so satisfying to me. It's not the classic superheroes defeating the supervillains, not even getting to the point where the superheroes defeat them and then going, no, I don't want to fight. It's none of that stuff. It's just suddenly the fight not mattering anymore. Not in that way, you know? Both of them, and also probably Keeley as well, have begun a new cycle in their arcs that is free to be about something entirely different. For Rebecca, it's now not about beating Rupert, it's about winning.
For all of us, for Richmond.
For Nate, coaching is no longer about proving himself to his dad or any of that, it's free to be about playing the way he plays the violin. And for Keeley, I'm hoping she's now fully free to run her business the way she wants to. I think. Perhaps that's a stretch with Keeley, I don't know. I've forgotten to mention Roy, though. It isn't until his conversation with Leanne that he becomes fully conscious on exactly why he broke up with Keeley. And the fact that it would have hurt her. He hasn't really stopped to consider any of that. I think less from selfishness than really giving himself the headspace to process everything there. But realising it now, he does the right thing, which was to apologise and properly talk about it, and then leave without expecting Keeley to fall back into his arms just because he's finally gotten out of his head, you know? Keeley could have changed massively in the time they were last together. I liked seeing him walk off, so them then suddenly being together again after that, it does slightly undermine it. Again, it feels a little too abrupt, but I get it's a nice contrast to Rupert and Rebecca. I still think we definitely need more between Roy and Keeley before we can say this arc is complete, you know? I really liked Nate apologising to Will, and also how that ties back into going back to his roots as a kid man. I'd still like a moment for the two of them to talk directly and for Will to actually get the chance to voice his feelings to Nate, but that's good. Edwin Akufo, there is a lot to say there, but it seems like his story with Sam is going to crop up again, so I'm going to wait for now on that. This is a wonderful episode about returning to roots, either in order to reconnect to what matters, or in order to let things go. Probably both of them. But yeah, comment your thoughts, what I got right or missed or got wrong or stuff. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe. Maybe support me on Patreon. A big thank you to Anvil, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Luke Hoare, Treat Trukaba, Michael Gallagher, In Squares, Flying Spider, Arwin, Devin, Soup in Boots, Samara Salsi, Joshua C. Follier and Chad Bramwell. Thank you.